welcome to Tune In with Michigan's Public Safety Communication System, or welcome to Tune In with the MPSCS. I'm Brad Stoddard, Director of the Office of Michigan's Public Safety Communication System, also known as the MPSCS. Sometimes I'm referred to as the state radio system, that great radio system, the awesome state system, and anything else in between. End of the day, we all know it's just the MPSCS. For 30 years, MPSCS has provided a stable, secure framework for interoperable communication across Michigan's local, state, federal, tribal, and private first responder communities. It's a mission we're proud to uphold, and this year we're celebrating a major milestone, the 30th anniversary of Michigan's Public Safety Communication System. As far back on September 30th, 1995, Michigan broke ground on Phase 1 of this system. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit our offices, right at the main door is one of those special shovels that's marked with the date when the ground was broken on that remarkable day when we started efforts to construct the first tower in this system. From that first tower, we launched across southeast Michigan and the Lansing area. That moment marked the beginning of a new era in public safety communications for Michigan. To help us reflect on the journey from those early days to where we are now and where we're heading, I'm thrilled to welcome two of the pioneers of Michigan's public safety communication system. First, we have Theron Chenu to my right, who served on the MPSCS from the early days of 1981, where he started his career with the Michigan State Police, to the conclusion of his career with the MPSCS in 2019. He started out as a steeplejack on the tower crew, climbing all of the legacy towers that predated the MPSCS. Some might even identify the safety issues of those early towers that no doubt structured our future direction of what we have with the MPSCS. Theron rose to the ranks to become the deputy director before retiring after an incredible 37 years with state government. And to Theron's right, we have Mr. Bob Batis, Senior Director and Business Relationship Manager with Motorola Solutions. Bob was there from the beginning as well, when the state partnered with Motorola in the mid-90s to help build the foundation of what MPSCS is today. Gentlemen, it's great to have you on the podcast today.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
Great to be here. So before we get into the MPSCS story, let's give folks a chance to get to know both of you a little bit better. Theron, tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, your family, any hobbies. What have you been up to since you retired? Give us a little bit about your career.
Okay. All right. Well, originally born in Fremont, Michigan, just north of Grand Rapids. And my wife, Kim, and I got married in 1980 and got a job with Michigan State Police in 81. So it was a pretty quick change from Fremont, where we lived, down to Lansing. And we have two daughters, and they have kids, and so we have three grandkids now. And first had two daughters and two grandkids, and we were ever going to get a boy, and finally got a grandson. So that's all good. Early before Kim and I were married, I joined the Army post-high school, specializing in communications. Spent 4 years stationed in Germany and California. Studied electronics at the local college in Monterey, California. Apparently my grades weren't good enough because I only got hired in as a steeplejack and not a radio tech or an engineer like you. But anyhow, after the military, I returned to Michigan and started a career as a steeplejack with Grant Tower, which is based in Grant, Michigan, which is far from Fremont, Michigan. And that job entailed traveling all over the U.S., installing all sorts of communications towers, doing repair and maintenance on 1,000-foot TV towers. Not home a lot, hard work. So when the opportunity to join the Michigan State Police, I thought it was a gravy job. And when you say steeplejack crew, there's only two of us. So it was just Dale White and myself that was maintaining 65 approximately towers. That was probably about the dangerous towers I've ever climbed. 50-plus-year-old towers, no anti-fall devices, no ladders, just climbing on 1/8 inch angles. It wasn't any fun. I wasn't sure what I got into. So did that, and then like you said, and we'll talk more about it, but in 95 we started planning, or even before that we started planning about the MPSCS. And I was really looking forward to some nice, new, safe towers.
Well, it's good. Was one thing that I'd like to share with our listeners. When you think about how big the world is, and then we have conversations with people and realize how small the world is. I recall a conversation that you and my dad had at one point, and I didn't even know this, but as the three of us were standing around the tailgate of a truck and listening to you and my dad talk about being stationed at the same base in Germany, that was a first for me. That the two of you, was a number of span of years between the two of you, were both sharing the high times as well as commiserating, and some of what you dealt with on that base. For me, that was a surreal moment as I heard one of my closest friends and peers that I worked with having a conversation with my father about his military career. That was pretty. And then during that same time, find out there's stationed at the same base. That's interesting.
Pretty crazy.
Well, I know, fortunately, Theron, I've had the opportunity to know you, a great deal of years, you and your wife, Kim, and your daughters, and the opportunity to even get to know all of your grandkids as well through the years. It's definitely been not only an honor to work with you, but even better to be a really good friend of yours, so you share your family with me. But I want to take us back to, your retirement. We had the opportunity to submit a special tribute for you for your retirement, and I know it is, placed very appropriately in your home so everyone else can see that. But I just want to read this piece that we submitted that I know made it into that special tribute. What that said, and that tribute is, the public safety multi-million-dollar radio rebanding project and remediation would not have gone the way that they did, on time and on budget, without the steady hand, tremendous leadership, and vast experience Theron brought to the projects. In addition to managing and overseeing over $500 million in MPSCS-related projects, Theron brought purposeful and proactive planning that forced critical thinking before work began, minimizing schedule, impact, and rework. Theron, at that time, your impact was recognized by many. Not only the team that you worked with day in, day out, but also our partners with Motorola. But that was a special time, not only for you, but all of us, to have you recognized in that legislative special tribute. So I want to make sure our listeners had the opportunity to hear the impact that you've had over a great deal of time in your career on this great state of Michigan. As I proudly share around the nation when I talk to our peers, we're more than just a phenomenal peninsula. We are the high five state in the nation, and no doubt you definitely helped us achieve that many times over, in your passion and focus to have an impact not only on the public safety community but also the citizens of Michigan. So thank you for that.
Well, thanks, Brad. Appreciate that.
Now we'll make our way to Mr. Bob Batis, as we identified his role with Motorola. But Bob's had a number of roles with Motorola, and an impact not only on the state of Michigan, but his impact across the nation with those roles that he initially started here in Michigan and then expanded across the nation. And Bob will go into a little more detail with that. But we're going to take the same approach, Bob, if you don't mind. If you could tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, your family, your hobbies, what have you been up to recently in your Motorola role? Could you expand on your whole career for us?
Absolutely. First off, I want to thank you guys both for this tremendous opportunity. Maybe more importantly, I want to thank you, Theron. It's been 30 years of a tremendous friendship. People come into your life, they say for a reason, a season, or a lifetime, and this has been a lifetime, and that's the best kind of friendship. So for that, thank you. It's been a great ride. We got a lot more to go. We're going to be here for the 50th, by the way.
It's good to know.
with that said, I'm not so sure, and I hope Kim got it in the background, but just while you were speaking about there, and a bald eagle came in, got a fish, and went right across over there. I certainly hope it's in the picture because it was absolutely beautiful, and it's kind of emblematic of what's going on here. So, a little bit about me. Born and raised in Joliet, Illinois. I was born and raised into a blue-collar family. We lived on the toughest part of town. We call it the east side of Joliet. And I learned to be tough early on. And toughness is just part of how I was raised. But getting past all that, when I started working, it was young. I probably started at 14 or 15, working on farms, doing hard labor. That's my dad thought I needed something to do, and not sit around in the summer. So that really started the work ethic part of who I am. And then my uncle had an asphalt/concrete company. I started working for him young as well. And I learned how to run crews and doing all that kind of stuff. And then I progressed into working for a mechanical contractor where I worked a lot in chemical plants and refineries. And that probably set the stage for the rest of my career. I learned really quick there. I was put in charge of a lot of things, and I started working on turnarounds, they call them. And those are typically 7 days or 14 days or 21 days. But each day, if you're late a day, it's over $1 million of lost profit at the refinery. So I learned how to plan. I learned how to understand risk. I learned how to make decisions. And I learned how to be solid and kind of learn how to lead and deal with people and that kind of thing. And that all led me to this. One of the engineers lead engineers out there, one you guys all know, Art Vanigs, that's where he was from, and that's where I met. So, I've known Art a lot of years, but when this project was let, he told everybody at Motorola, you got to get this guy if you're going to be successful. And that's how I got here. And it was a mission I wasn't quite sure of to begin with. I'm a construction guy. I know construction. I know that kind of thing, but little did I know about electronics, radio, or any of those types of things. But since then, a lot's changed. So that's kind of my story, where I came from. Sally and I got married in 1994. We've got 3 kids. We've raised them here on this lake, and I wouldn't look back. It's been a great place. I like to say that Illinois is a great place to be from, and Michigan's a great place to live.
Thanks, Bob. And I feel the same way. It was a pleasure when you came in. We started a couple towers, and we had some problems with the cement, and the powers that be, they didn't know construction, and I'm going, this needs a little more care. And that's when Motorola hired you, brought in, and from that point on, it just smoothed right out. And like you said, we met our deadlines and got her done.
Yeah, it's great. You also, Bob, that you didn't share, some of your passions. You love to hunt and fish, and I know you've got a great deal number of wall hangers that I've seen through the years. So just for our listeners, how many do you have on your wall that you've successfully gotten through the years?
5, 7, probably 9 or 10.
9.
Yeah.
And these would all be, if we were to class these, what would you class the majority of those 9 as?
I guess if you took the average, I'd say they're all 160 plus.
So definitely an avid hunter. Not many people know that, but the passion, no doubt, that you put into the Motorola investment in the MPSCS and success is the same level that you put into your personal life as well. And very much like I shared about Theron, I've gotten to know Bob, you and your family through the years as well, your wife and your kids, and equally so. I'm fortunate to get to know your family, both of your families, through the years. It's being able to break bread with both of you and your family's been a definitely proud moment of mine to be in that small circle of friends to be able to do that. So thank you.
Amen. Well said.
As it, and on behalf of all of our public safety users across the state. There's over 2,600 agencies on the system today. We've doubled the amount of towers on the system from, well, not quite doubled, but it feels like it some days, from 180 towers to 355 towers. That's a pretty significant shift in 30 years, considering we concluded the initial build of the system in 2002. So, in really 23 years, we've added almost double the amount of infrastructure. That itself is impactful. But it's all the efforts that you guys identified in the early days of this system that were the structured standards, the same standardized approach we've taken since then. So we appreciate all you've done and continue to do for this system. So we're going to take a little break. When we come back, we'll chat about the big shift to the MPSCS from its legacy system that predated it, and how it really changed the game for public safety communications and interoperability in Michigan. Commercial break.
Being prepared is a part of who you are, but it's especially important in the case of a disaster. Be informed about possible emergencies in your area. Make a plan that covers where you'll go in an emergency. Build a kit for the things you need to survive. There's no one more capable of planning for your situation than you. Start your plan today. Go to ready.gov/myplan.
Welcome back to Tune In with the MPSCS. Again, I'm Brad Stoddard, Director of Michigan's Public Safety Communications System, also known as the MPSCS. And we're soon celebrating our 30th anniversary by reflecting on the early days of the system. And with us today, we have two key figures who helped shape it all, Mr. Theron Cheneux and Mr. Bob Batis. Let's rewind the clock just a little bit, and let's go back to the beginning. What was the vision of the MPSCS in those early days, and why was it needed in the first place?
Well, it started in early 1990s, and exactly when, I don't know. I was up on towers. I wasn't privy to a lot of that stuff, but the towers were in bad shape. And it was a 42 megahertz system. It had a lot of dead spots. Equipment was getting old. There was certainly justification for the MSP to create a new radio system. Michigan's always been a leader in public safety communications, so it wasn't a stretch to see this happening again. And then in the early 1990s, when specifications of things were starting to be developed, I was tasked with putting specifications together for the towers and stuff. And having climbed all sorts of towers and installed towers, I kind of had what I felt was probably the best situation to end up in. And we added things like 5-mile-an-hour wind loading, half an inch of ice, some additional antennas floating at the top and at the 200-foot level, so which really was preparing for the future, but not knowing exactly what was going to happen with the future. And it was just, I don't want to say all luck. I mean, I certainly was planning for extra loading because modifying a tower is not easy. And boy, did that come true with all the locals that joined. I mean, first, for the other locals, you had the other MDOT and DNR join. So there wasn't a whole lot of additional loading to bring on DNR and MDOT, maybe some antennas to dispatch control stations. But once the locals started coming, we were really eating into that additional loading, which we didn't have to modify the towers and beef them up. So from that perspective, that was a good call, and that got us down the road to the point they said, well, you did a great job on that. Well, what about writing specs for, the shelter and the generators and HVAC units and stuff? So, had thoughts on redundancy and always looking ahead for what's it going to take to maintain these units. Michigan has been a leader in maintaining their own systems. A lot of other states and countries, they hire all that out. Michigan didn't do that. MSP had their own communications crew, and And that's the goal to go forward, was to maintain this new system. It was going to be a lot larger. We're going to need more people, and needed to design it where that was going to be advantageous for us to do.
That's good. A couple things I'll add in there, as I recall from the history research I did, is, as you shared previously, how fragile those prior towers were that you were climbing as Steeplejack. And my understanding, that infrastructure was built in the middle of 1942. In the middle of the World War II, that infrastructure was put in place. And as you identified, the history that Michigan has had with public safety communications, law enforcement communications, I think initially started was in the city of Detroit. And that was in the late 1920s. So we're almost on 100 years that Michigan has had a hand in the leadership there. So it's interesting to see, I think from the history I understood, is, the Michigan State Police initially created the first statewide system, considerably different technology than what we have today, in the early 1930s. And then they replaced that system with newer technology, and again, in the middle of World War II. And that stayed in place until the MPSCS, was really constructed. But as part of the history as well, as I believe in 1984 is when the Michigan State Police said, we need to do something. We need to create change. And those activities that I'm sure you reported as concerns as a Steeplejack around the infrastructure that was out there, and your peers that were radio techs supporting aging infrastructure, drove that direction of providing not only an environment that was robust, but also the vision that all of you had for the future, that would a system that would replace it would be based on a standards-based system, as well as providing the capability for, just at that time, just troopers to talk from one end of the state to the other. Interestingly, as many of our listeners know, as well as you guys are well aware, cell phones didn't even have that type of reliability then, and they sure don't have it today either. So there's something to be said about land mobile radio and the value it has for, public safety today. But, great points. Bob, anything you'd like to weigh in on that as well from your time, from the Motorola perspective in early days?
Well, I'll take a couple shots at that. I didn't understand the vision that was being created. I had a task, and I was going to finish that task. That was to go build it. But as Theron and I started working together, and I started questioning a lot of things, I began to see what that vision was. And as I said earlier, I may not have understood radio and those types of things, but I did understand construction. And then I was really started to understand towers and prefabricated buildings and generators. And I think that vision, what we ended up building to that vision, is what we took nationally. So like you said, I did a lot of things after I left this system, but I took what we did, what we created, and I wanted to make sure that everybody else was going to build something as resilient, as redundant as this system. And so, I was able to understand the vision, see the vision, after a little time, and then, basically take that and replicate it across the country to a lot of different states. And there's a lot of states that all started from this. As Theron said, Michigan's a leader, and they've always been a leader, and I didn't understand that at first. And now I clearly understand that. I understood it after the first couple of years of what we were doing, and nobody else could even think about doing that. And everybody telling you're never going to get it done. You can't get it done. Here, we got it done. So I think that's probably the only thing I'd add, Brad.
Good. Well, thanks, Bob.
The thing I also wanted, it was a cutting edge system, first of its kind, and having our own people maintained it brought people from all over the U.S. and the world. I mean, we had countries coming in and asking you, how are you doing this? And I remember sitting in conference rooms half a days, and I don't know, it was a country of Taiwan or whatever was here for a whole day, explaining everything we did and everything like that. So it really was surprising to me at first how monumental this system was, and from the different aspect that we were maintaining it in-house and still are.
Yeah, that's a great point there. And add to that is, you may recall we had the University of Ottawa that came in and spent 3 days with us as they were trying to help, the provincial police of Ontario identify provincial-wide system. And the report that came back out of that is it was remarkable what we had, not just as a public safety communication system, but it was the personnel. At that point, we had not experienced any turnover of personnel, and unfortunately, I think at that time the only people that had left were either retirement or death. We still had much of the same team that was in place, and I know that was a very sobering moment as we saw that report from the University of Ottawa, which almost in a way mimicked a very similar report from the University of Michigan in the early days, even before I had joined and had the opportunity to read, where it identified what the structure needed to be for the Michigan State Police or the state of Michigan to support a system of this size. And to see that almost probably 30 years between the original University of Michigan report and then what we saw from the University of Ottawa, it was very enlightening that no doubt through the years we've done the majority of things correct. Where there's some things that maybe we could have adhered to a little bit tighter to the initial report, that would have been beneficial. But to see that we still, from the outside looking in, from an independent authority that was rating us as success and touting that, we know that report was shared not only with the Ontario Provincial Police, but we know other countries were also able to see that report that was provided. So, that again, the accolades to you and all the rest of the early leaders in the system that had a vision and put that vision to reality, working with Bob Batis and the rest of the team at Motorola. And I know there was a great deal of personnel in Motorola. It wasn't just Bob.
Oh no, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. I don't want to skip over the other people that built this, and we haven't really talked a lot about building it, because there was a lot of fun, but a lot of long days. But you're right. You got to talk about Chuck Kuzum.
No, yeah,
Tom.
we'll get there. I just want to add one more thing to what you said.
Yes, sir.
So, I have traveled this entire country, laying out towers, bidding towers, looking at all this stuff, seeing all these systems, and unequivocally, there is not anything like Michigan out there. They're just not. The communication system, more importantly, the personnel, to both of your points, that actually run and keep this thing going the way it is. The processes, the procedures, all the quality checks, all the things you do to help protect yourself, but more importantly, all the first responders and the citizens of this state. It's a hidden gem that everybody needs to understand how great it is. It really is that great. It really is. And I don't say that because I helped build it. I say that because I've seen an awful lot, and there's nothing like it.
It is a best kept secret. I mean, there's people in Michigan still aren't familiar with it. They don't know what it is. And that's probably a good thing, that all that happens behind the scenes. But it's amazing how I talk to people today and they don't know anything about it. So
I completely agree. I had an opportunity recently. I was attending a Cherry Festival and had just a casual conversation with the gentleman that was standing next to me, and he was a police officer in Southeast Michigan, and we were sharing each, of what we both do. And I told him, I said, well, we probably help you every day and you don't know it. And I shared him with the exact same, analogy of we're the Wizard of Oz, and he touted how great the system worked for them, and they were a later adopter in the system, but how much this, end user, this first responder on the street, and what he saw or what he observed every day, what the system was providing for him, in a way it was kind of a surreal moment for him to run into someone that's actually the Wizard of Oz providing for him behind the scenes. So I completely agree with you, but that's a great segue, because now we're going to get into the next question. Who are the key players in designing, building, and bringing this vision to life, and how did those partnerships come together?
Well, I guess I'll just take a little shortcut first and list a couple of names that are always on the top of my head. And, Dave Held, Harry Warner, Captain Steffel, Captain Miller, the rock and roll star Brad Stoddard. All these state people, like you said, I mean, they were dedicated. I mean, they really put a lot of their life and soul into the system. And before, with the original MSP system and the new one. And then working with Garrison and Tom. And like I said, it was just a godsend when you showed up and you and I were out, with our blue jeans, that Brad will probably talk about. But out there doing these sightings of these towers, and like you said, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have GPS. I mean, you drove a lot. Most of the driving you did. I had my laptop with an old Garmin unit with an antenna on it, and going finding coordinates and stuff. So I mean, I've got a couple things I want to talk about in the build out of the system, because we saw a lot of Michigan, if not most of it. And but there was certainly a lot of people that supported me and guided me, and they made it a wonderful career.
I'd add a couple things. And on our side, of course, we had we couldn't have done our job if we didn't have our engineering team saying, "Hey, go out here, go do this." So you had the Carl Zimmer, Steve Vidra, Mike Beebe, Tom Garrison, Chuck Cousineau, John Burkett, Dave Weatherwax, Jerry Buchanan. He was the first ST out there.
Yeah.
Barb Nichols, Geraldine Maida. That was the cohesive team. And if it wasn't for that team, we couldn't have been successful. It was just always, no, it's over here. No, Bob there and go check this one out. Bob there and go check this one out. And that's what we were doing. A couple different things. Steffel was probably my favorite character outside of you and I, just because Jeff was in the right place at the right time. Everybody goes in these leadership positions for a reason if you're successful. And Jeff was there because we needed a bull. We needed to knock down barriers and roadblocks so we can go do our job. One of the, before I forget it, it just popped in mind, Dave Doty from the state.
Yeah.
Dave Doty was doing the site acquisition. So right after we said, this is where it is, Dave and team were all over it. There was Mary
Levine.
Mary Levine. Mary. So that team also was very key cog in the wheel for us to be successful. Because if you don't have the land, you're not going to build the tower. You can go site whatever you want, but if you don't get the land, you're not going to build it. Another thing I'd add here is that I guess you said it before, Brad, but this was the largest contract that the state had ever let. It was the largest contract that Motorola had ever embarked on. So you just can't imagine the pressure, or maybe you can imagine the pressure that's on the teams to go execute. I know there was pressure from Steffel down on you guys, and there was pressure all the way from back in Schaumburg to Chris Galvin and everybody else to be successful, because we couldn't fail. The one thing I'd add on this is that on the Public Act, or on the, not Public Act, on the first phase, there was 4 phases scheduled for this, but it was a one and done, or it's a one and everything. And if we weren't successful in phase 1, everything else was bye-bye. So a $200 million contract, we could have failed, but we used that as motivation to be successful. So all those things came together. I guess that's kind of stuff I talk about when we talk about partnerships and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think many of the names of those personnel, some unfortunately are no longer with us, and those that still are, that are retired. I know I've had the opportunity to talk to some of them. I know both of you gentlemen have the opportunity to talk to some of them, and many still ask at times, "Hey, how's the system doing?" Or they'll ask different things. So I think it goes back to earlier what we had in the podcast, is there was the passion, there was the people, and much as what you both identified, many of the resources weren't coming in with an expertise in statewide systems or an expertise in, particular, system-wide components. They weren't radio experts. They were microwave backhaul experts, but they became radio experts. They became backhaul experts. They became generator experts, concrete experts. And it happened across the board. I fortunately had the opportunity to come in as Jeff Steffel was the captain. I think it was a few months after is when I hired in, because I believe Dave Held retired in 1997. And then Jeff Steffel came in after that. Oddly, I still remember the interview that I had the end of December in 97 with Jeff Steffel, Harry Warner, Tom Evans, and HR person from MSP. Unfortunately, I don't remember her name. And one of the questions that I had, this just goes to, the passion of the personnel on the other side of the table. I was interviewing for a position that was more network related because that was some background experience. But in my resume, I talked about some security aspects that I was doing in my space and defense days. And my understanding from Jeff and Harry is they believe that if I knew one thing about microwave, I could be their microwave expert. So I became the microwave expert and didn't know anything about microwave at that point when I came in. But it was that level of passion. Anyone could easily have identified, well, he doesn't know that, so how's it going to help us? Instead, everyone came together. How can we help one another? I remember the early days of Steve Vidra, sharing with me some of the knowledge he had. And I know he's long since retired as well. I think it was that collaboration that we had. Another team that we haven't talked about yet, it was our quality assurance team. Beaver Goff Associates and Jack Duncan, that was part of that. And I've had the opportunity, we've done this in the past in a prior video with Jeff Steffel and Chuck Kuzno, where we talked about the culture that was established back then, where there wasn't one entity that would fail. We were all going to fail together. So it really attributes back to the prior comment you shared, Bob, of the system itself was there was a level of commitment on both sides that this was a big deal. No one was going to allow it to fail. And, many projects that we've all seen at different times where, one entity of that project, may not have carried the water, and the success of that project was visible. And some have pointed fingers. It was that individual's fault or that team's fault. That was never anything that we experienced as part of the system. It became our fault. And our was the three legs of that equilateral triangle. Our QA team with Beaver Goff and Associates, the Motorola team led by Chuck Kuzno, and the MSP team led by Jeff Steffel, and then subsequently, Tom Miller, through the end of that project. And I think that's that same culture that we still have today, that, it's easy to complain, but let's just stop the complaining and let's just focus on the success. Let's put the work in and let's make it work. Very much like we had in the beginning, and being around from the beginning and being able to see that culture, live that culture, it was really easy. I think as we, see in any environment, you have new people added to it. That's new for them, and really trying to understand that. But
to that point, Brad, when we sat down and I first started reading the specs when I came here, I was a little overwhelmed. But then I saw the schedule, and I said, "Holy moly, this is going to be quite the challenge." But to your point, we didn't use it as an excuse; we used it as motivation. And we're sitting around a table in Jeff Steffel. It's me and Jeff and Chuck and Garrison. I don't remember if Theron was there or not, to be honest. I just remember him asking, "What do you guys need to be successful on this project?" And I told him three things. I said, we need to be exempt from local zoning. We need to make sure that this is a state-inspected project, not a local inspected project. And thirdly, we need to make sure that the state standardize our drawings. And the process would be 7 to 14 days. I said, and I laid it out. I said, if you can't do these things, this is going to be a 10-year project. And immediately Jeff I think it was within 2 days, had a meeting set up with me and Irvin Polk, who was the director of
Remember that name.
Bureau of Construction Codes. And we sat down, Jeff, myself, Garrison, and Irvin, and I laid out everything. And Irvin looks at me and says, "We got you. We can do those things." So that's the motivation you talk about that Jeff had to make sure that we did it. One could have just said, "You're on your own. You got this contract." But he didn't. He said, "What do we collectively need to do to be successful?" And that same culture, I think, has carried us through this 30 years. It's a give and take. We'll talk about some of that stuff, but give and take. But that was the beginning of the success. And the local exemption thing, this is, again, where everyone should applaud what Jeff Steffel did. He took that and he got legislation added or amended to Public Act 538, which made this system, when we're building it, exempt from local zoning. And it went through a couple lawsuits. It proved valuable, and we moved on. This thing would have never been built if those 3 steps weren't taken on the front end of this. So
I got to throw one more kudos out to Jeff Steffel. Hopefully his head doesn't get too big about that. But within a month of him being the new director, he goes, "I want to go climb a tower." And I go, "You want to climb a tower?" And he goes, "I want to know what you do." And we went out and climbed a 330-foot tower in Owasso. And I'm going, this is remarkable. I mean, I've never had a director that wanted to understand what a steeplejack was, what it took. And that always impressed me. So I really appreciate, Jeff, you doing that.
That's good. Thanks, Aaron. Because I know I'm going to hear that from the rest of the team listening to this podcast. Yes, I better start getting ready to be climbing a tower here real soon. I think, with that is, I know you and I had joked about this in the office for years, but I've even heard it from some of the team is, when am I going to come out and do their job? And I offer them the same. When you want to come do my job? Fortunately, they're not taking me up on it as fast, so we're kind of equal in that. But I agree the same as what I saw with Jeff back in the day as a young engineer. He wanted to know what we did. And it wasn't just that we were working. He wanted to understand the fundamentals. He really wanted to understand that. Very similar was true with Tom Miller. Tom wasn't as hands-on, I think, as Jeff was in what we were doing. He was taking a step back, looking at it from a project standpoint. But it's that passion of any of the leaders of all 3 teams that were involved, no doubt, was the success of what we had in the early days that we still see as success today. But I know around some of the bigger challenges, as Bob, you identified some at there, and you did as well. But what about working with different stakeholders? Do you have any issues, outside of, I know, Bob, you shared, within state government, but outside of state government, like around site acquisitions? Any stories you can share with our listeners of, any opportunities that you guys had to be news media? At the last minute, maybe.
Bob, you deal with that one.
I will deal with that one. This is how much I really came to like Jeff Steffel. And our camaraderie goes deep and wide. And the respect I had for him and this organization. When Jeff asked me at one point, we were getting a lawsuit was coming, but they were playing the long game. And they were going to stretch this thing out as long as they can. And Jeff, his strategy was, no way, we're going to get this thing moving right now. He came up to me and said, "Bob, would you mind getting arrested?" And I said, "Is it a felony or a misdemeanor?" He said, "No, I don't really want you to get arrested, but you're going to act like you're going to go get arrested, because if you do cut a tree, they'll arrest you. So don't cut the tree, but at least start the chainsaw. And there's going to be cameras all over the place. There's going to be somebody that's going to give you a stop work order. I need that stop work order. You need to bring it back to me." And go from there. So Theron and I drove to this site, and by God, he was right. There was cameras waiting for us. There was people waiting for us. I drove my Bronco right in, or they had the Bronco at the time. Drove my Bronco right in there, and put our hard hats on, grabbed the chainsaw, took it out, started to do it, and everybody went ape shit. Stop. Yeah, they went crazy, and the cameras were rolling. They gave us a stop work order, and Oh, and we were given strict instructions. Don't talk to the media.
Yeah.
Don't say a word. And they were asking us all sorts of questions, and a lady finally asked, well, do you know your name? I can't tell you. And away we went. So that was quite the challenge. It was quite fun, actually. But, yeah, you talk about dealing with something. But I would do that again in a heartbeat, if that's what it meant to get the system doing what we got.
I don't think Jeff asked me, but
no,
he kind of told me. But the other one, the one, there's several, but Scioto Township. You know, when we go site these towers, there's a lot of NIMBYs. I don't want it in my backyard. I want a tower, I don't want it in my backyard. Well, in Scioto Township, down by Ann Arbor, we find an industrial park. It's like, this is a perfect place to put a tower. The tower was a 485-foot tower, and it was like 300 feet away from the water tower. This is beautiful, scenic
Scioto Township.
And they went crazy. You know, you can't put this big tower up next to our beautiful water tower. And the whole thing was, well, it could fall over and knock out water to the community. And, of course, Motorola and Pyrod, the tower manufacturer, brought their engineers in. They don't work that way. So we were allowed to move forward and finally get that tower put up. But there were entities, civilian and government, that would push back for not good reasons. That's for sure, in my opinion. Yeah.
You know, one of the other challenges, when you say it, I look back at it. I say it. Probably one of the biggest challenges we had was us. Us trying to figure out how to be a team, us trying to figure out and align ourselves to go execute this. You know, at the I said this early on. You know, Theron and I we had many of sometimes heated discussions on what the intent of the contract meant, and I don't really understand this, or I don't really understand that. He got frustrated. David Goff got frustrated. We all got frustrated. And again, Jeff, your head don't get too big. He brought us into a room. I don't know if you remember that.
No, I remember.
At headquarters, the old one there, and he locked you, me, and David Goff in a room, and he said, "You don't come out of here until you figure it out. I'll be standing out here. You let me know when you figure it out." And you know, it was at that point in time that we just kind of looked around the room. We realized that we all have the same goal in mind. We all want to do the right thing. So that's how our partnership kind of really began. We realized we have to have give and take here. You know, puts and takes to get this thing done right. And in order to execute on behalf of us and behalf of you, we just realized we had to align ourselves and figure it out. So I really understand it. That's really, I really understood what the beginning of trust and relationships and alignment and goals and bring those things together, and having three people going at the same goal is a lot easier than one. And that was so from a challenge perspective, it started that way. It ended a lot different.
Yeah, and that was really early on.
It was.
I mean, it wasn't too far into the project.
No.
And like I said, after that we were hitting on all cylinders, and there was no stopping us at that point.
Yeah. I think I came here in actually I moved here in April. Well, we bought the lot in April up here, but I started in mid-July, and that's when it started. We started right then. I mean, I got an advanced copy of the specs, so I was reading them in advance before I started. But yeah, it started in July, August.
You know, while we're, you know, on the what we've learned from Jeff Stoeffel moments, you know, as a young engineer that came in, there, and you may recall this, Bob, I had not met you at that time, but it was at a time where I had maybe a little bit longer hair than I do now, and I recall on a Friday, Jeff Stoeffel stepped into my office and said, "Hey, Monday, off the collar," and I thought he was joking. And so I joked back. You know, I was a young, I guess, spirited,
energetic
young man.
Sure.
So I laughed and pushed back, and he sternly looked at me and he said, "Official order," and rattled off what the official order was: cut your hair by Monday. And then he said, "Also, by the way, get your plates changed. You live in Michigan now." So there was a couple moments where his his personality definitely came through. And with that, as you said earlier in the podcast there, and I remember another time as a young engineer, my prior engineering jobs I had, I showed up to work in jeans and flannel shirts or collared shirts for the most part, until I started working for the Michigan State Police, and then I was to show up every day in a suit. And at the time, it wasn't that long into the job, and Jeff Steffel pulls the engineers in the room, and there was 4 of us at the time, and he shut the door, and he said in a very strong tone, the workday is from 8 to 5, lunch is from 12 to 1. You'll wear a suit every day. Got any questions? And he wasn't looking for questions. It was a statement. And I never understood at the time, because here I saw Theron. It was early on in the days when I met Theron. Clearly I'm in a suit and tie every day at this point, following the rules of the boss. And Theron was in jeans and work boots. I'm like, man, how does this work? And I find out what Theron's role was. And man, I somehow convinced Jeff Steffel that, hey, engineers, A, it's okay for them not to wear a suit every day, but 2, also be in the field a little bit more often than what we were. So we'll roll forward a whole lot of years, because I think Jeff retired not long after he had been there, maybe 18 months-ish, somewhere around there. I know Jeff we'll catch that in the next podcast, Jeff, and how long you were there after you made a great decision in hiring me, we'll say, wink. But I joked with that about Jeff, and he shared the story with me many years later, decades later, actually. And it was the leadership that he had from a perspective which I didn't see at the time. I was seeing it as a young man, didn't understand. And what he was sharing was, we were the first engineers that the state police was hiring. And most of the people within the office, they didn't know what an engineer did. They didn't know engineers. And he wanted to make sure that we were respected as professional technical leaders in that environment. And he believed that, it's what we've all learned is, you act the way that you look. And if you look professional, you're acting professional. And that's a level of integrity and leadership. And, it was one of those, in a way, I think jokingly, I smiled. I definitely didn't say it because I still respect Jeff immensely. I felt like, man, why didn't you just tell us that way back, in those early days? But, I think that itself is, we all are sharing our memories of Jeff and how he approached things. He approached things very methodically. Sometimes it didn't necessarily make sense at the moment, but he had a very methodical process to his approach.